Deep greetings to you on the first anniversary of Anwaka. I am Lala Rahman, Anwaka coordinator of Epiphania Visuals. Anwaka was founded in the month of October 2020 by Deepa Mahbuba Yasmin, the director of Epiphania Visuals. With today's panel discussion, we are officially announcing the opening of our annual Symposium 2021. We have designed today's panel discussion with some of the most common questions that came up during Anwaka's group conversation. The main purpose of our open discussion is to rediscuss, rethink, reconsider the need of our Anwaka platform. Today, we are going to discuss the Asian asexual movement. Should it stay individual or should it merge with the West? I, Lala Rahman, am with you as today's moderator. We have our honorable guest, Michael Torre, the member of the Global Asexual Visibility and Education Network AVEN's project team. He's a citizen of United Kingdom. And our panelists are D. Rosaline, Indonesian Asexuals, Sofia D. Guzman, Asexual Support Philippines, Sarah Cosgrave, UK citizen of Filipino ethnicity, Anjali Kaur, Mauritius citizen of Indian ethnicity, Pat Young, Canadian citizen of Chinese ethnicity, and Kerry Chin from Hong Kong. We are very glad that we found some of the most experienced activists from Asia and some very enthusiastic A-Spec member and activist from Global Citizen of Asian ethnicity as our panelists. Now I request to all to share something about yourself. Can we start with your name, nationality, and ethnicity, and your sexual orientation, if you're willing to share?
However, who's gonna go first, or which one do we follow?
Sophia, you can start first, please.
Hello, everyone. A good day to you. My name is Andrea Sofia de Guzman. I am a Filipino, and there's not much of an ethnicity in my place. I'm also pure Filipino, I suppose that's what's to say. Sexual orientation is demi-romantic asexual. It's a pleasure to be with everyone.
Okay, thank you. Can we ask Kerry?
Hi everyone, my name is Kerry. I'm aromantic and asexual. I'm Chinese. I'm of Chinese descent, and I lived in Hong Kong until I was 15, and that's the country I'll be talking about, even though I don't currently live there.
Okay. Please, anybody, Anjali.
Hi everyone, my name is Anjali. I'm from Mauritius. I use the pronouns she, her. I'm of Indian ethnicity, and my sexual orientation is asexual panromantic.
Okay, thank you, Anjali. Sarah, please share with us.
Hi everyone, I'm Sarah. I grew up and live in the UK, and I am of mixed Filipino and white, because one of my parents is Filipino and one of my parents is white. I identify as asexual or A-Spec. I don't actually really have a specific label because I don't really know where I sit on the spectrum, and I'm currently questioning my romantic orientation, although I know that I'm alloromantic. Nice to meet you all.
Okay, thank you. Michael, please.
Hello, my name is Michael, also known as Mick. I am asexual, and I am white British. So while I'm very happy to be here, very happy to be invited, and I would like to support in any way I can, I will probably not be doing too much of the talking as far as the questions on the panel is concerned, but I will. I'm very happy to help in any way I can.
Okay, thank you. Pat.
Hi all, my name is Pat. I'm from Canada of Chinese descent, and I identify as asexual and romantic. And I'm happy to talk about what that means to me.
Thank you. Dia, please.
Hi, my name is Dea, and I'm asexual, and I know I'm alloromantic, but I don't know what specifically. And I'm from Indonesia. I'm new to the online ACES community, and currently, ever since the beginning of this year, I live in Germany to study.
Okay, cool.
I think so far 3 more people have joined us. Kishore, Oishi, and Dan. I think they have joined us as listeners. Okay, would you guys please update your pronoun and your country name? Dan, Oishi, and Sajjad Hussain Kishore. Would you please update your country and your pronoun? Yes. Thank you. Okay. Thank you so much, everybody. We can move on to our questions, I suppose. Please briefly share with us your queer journey, the supports or the challenges or any cultural expectations you had to break, or any challenges or any support even that you have got from your native country, please.
I guess I can go first.
Yes, please. Please.
Sure. I would say my journey began in high school. So I went to a Catholic high school, but we were surprisingly, I guess, open to talking about queerness in some ways. We had a club about respecting individual differences, and they did some educational pieces about different sexualities. And I had been part of that group, and I was researching, oh, like, what is asexual? What is, lesbians, and what is like queerness and that kind of stuff. And I made these posters with the group to put around the school. And back then I was just learning the language, and I was like, oh, I don't think any of these applies to me, but I just want to be a really good ally. But over the years, I kind of learned more, and I was like, oh, you know what? Some of these actually sound very relatable. So as I went to university, I met more people. I joined communities online, whether it was on Tumblr, on Discord, on Facebook, and started talking to more people and better understand my journey.
Right. Okay, thank you for sharing with us that. Sarah, please go on.
My journey is probably a lot shorter, I would say. So it was thanks to the pandemic, and this seems to be a very common theme I'm finding, is the number of people who have discovered something about themselves in regards to identity sort of over that time. And I think that, so last year is when I came to the realization that, oh, I thought I was straight, but there's like these little signs and really small things that kind of happened over the years. And also this feeling, I remember sort of saying a few times, oh, I think something might be wrong with me, and say it to my husband. And yeah, I came to the realization that I was asexual last year. It was mainly because I knew other people who are A-Spec as well, who kind of talked about their experiences. Somebody actually came out to me as demisexual, and I kind of went, oh, wow. Once I kind of researched into it and went into it, I realized that maybe that's something that might apply to me as well, as in being on the spectrum. I guess just thinking about Pat's story, about then thinking about my going back to school in the UK, we had something called Section 28, which was a law into, I think, 2003, which the phrasing was to stop the promotion of homosexuality, is the way it was phrased. And so access to any kind of LGBTQ plus identities, sort of knowledge around that, just wasn't there for when I was a teenager. And therefore it was something I kind of found out when I was a lot older, and actually knowing other people. And because within my sector, so I work in science communication, there are a lot of other LGBTQ plus people, and they are so supportive. And I use Twitter as an online, like that's a social media I tend to use. The support has been really wonderful there. But also, as I kind of mentioned in my introduction, I'm questioning my romantic orientation as well. It's just very interesting that when you open like the queer door, like what else is in here? And that's kind of where I'm at now. So yeah, so that's me.
Okay, thank you. That was really interesting, actually. Sophia, please.
A bit quite long, but I hope I'll try to make it as short as possible. I grew up mostly in a very Christian-dominated place, and it's heavily tied in our family and the culture that it's very Christian and traditionally Christian. So there is no tolerance at all. Despite of a lot of the posts of being supportive with the LGBT community, not everyone exactly understands what being LGBT here is, and it's limited to tolerance rather than acceptance and understanding. So it was hard. Especially the mentality was like sex is equals bad or sex equals sin. So there wasn't much room to think about it. But eventually, due to peer pressure, I got to grow up and I was like, everyone around me is having crushes. That seems to be the thing to talk about. So I should probably try to have a crush in order to have something to talk about that it just never fit in. It just didn't come naturally to me. And there's also the older I grow, the more ridiculous it's becoming to me because I was being teased a lot because of just basic teasing, and to the point that if I try to be friendly with someone, people will start, "Hey, you have a crush on him?" And then all of a sudden, it's an oof, no, and the friendship is cut off. I believe it helped in me thinking about why is it that certain codes of action are tied to being romantic, and what does being romantic entail? And those are such questions for an 8-year-old. And moving on to high school, I met some great open and supportive friends, and I keep mentioning about this to my friends that I don't understand why people are so into sex, or why are people so into having a romantic partner? Why is it a big deal? And then one of my friends suddenly just said, "Sophia, I think maybe you're asexual, a pan-romantic asexual." And that was the very first time I heard the term. It was like, what? And I started researching, I searched the terms, and voila, I was in the community, brand new knowledge, and I've been spreading this knowledge as much as I can so I would save them years of confusion, years of feeling like what is going on. So many people have been coming to me asking me for guidance themselves, like, is this what it is? Am I this? And it's been amazing. So that's how I got into the movement mostly.
Thank you, Sophia. I love what you said about acceptance and tolerance. That's so true. That's so true. Okay, can we ask Gary, please share with us?
So I've known about asexuality since my teens, and I'm now 32, so that's been some time now. But the issue didn't really come up until I was at university, when there were people who showed sexual and romantic interest in me. I'm also transgender, and I knew from a young age that I was really a boy, but I knew it was not something that I could tell people. And because of lack of information, I didn't know that transitioning was an option until I was at university. And at first, I was mostly just getting involved with the queer community as an asexual person, and it was only through that I found out the information. So I eventually went ahead with the medical transition, and it worked in my favor in terms of there not being any more people expressing sexual interest in me now that I look more like a man. My parents didn't approve of the transition at first, mostly because of their lack of understanding, but I think they are mostly used to it now. The asexuality doesn't come up in conversation as much. My mother used to ask me about my relationships, but I think she has learned not to waste her time asking that question.
Right. Thank you, Gary. Dia, please.
So I first found out about the term asexual and on my Instagram Explore page. When I read that, I felt like I think this might be me, but I don't know, because in Indonesia, religion plays such a big part, and like Sophia, it's like no sex before marriage. Sometimes even dating is like looked down upon by several people. So after that, I spent about 3 years questioning, like, is it me or is it not me? And then what made me sure was when I got a boyfriend, and I don't know, it just felt like not really my thing back then. And then my journey into the community was when on the AceCon back in August, I met several more Indonesian aces, which I don't know. They are, I don't know. I've never found any community in Indonesia because even the AVEN website is blocked. Indonesians cannot open the AVEN website without VPN. And then when I met these three aces also from Indonesia, and we were like, okay, let's make an Instagram account. Let's like explain about the spectrum and things like that. And so yeah, I am new.
Thank you. Anjali, please share with us.
So for me, I think during my teen years, I had some knowledge about the spectrum. Mostly at that time, it was mostly about asexuality rather than the whole spectrum. But then it was mostly, in Mauritius at that time, it was a really conservative society where you didn't have much information and much resources about queer identities. So at that time, even the information you had were mostly talking about LGBT identities. So you didn't really know whether as an asexual you were part of that whole spectrum or not. But it was mostly during my university years where I really got into questioning and reevaluating my identity, and finally came to the conclusion that I was within the A spectrum. And that's really when I started identifying really confidently with the asexual identity. And for the past 3 years, I have actually been working on LGBTQIA+ rights. But even when working in that field, you are not always at ease. For example, being open about your asexual identity, even within the community. So that was one of the things that of the obstacles I encountered really when it came to being an asexual in Mauritius, because within the larger LGBTQIA+ community, there is still much ignorance about asexual identities. And then in society in general, you almost never hear people speaking about asexuality in Mauritius. So you have this kind of a double barrier that's there. But of course, today with the use of social media and the internet, people are able to access information outside Mauritius. So that makes it easier for people today who are questioning to have more information about asexuality than it was possible 15 years earlier. So I think that's one of the good things that have happened. So for me today, to really be open publicly about my identity, which happened very recently. Actually, I think it's a few months back, actually, that I really decided that I think it was time for me to always affirm my identity as an asexual person, even when I'm going for training sessions or for sensitization sessions, because as someone who's working in the field of LGBTQIA+ rights, I was participating in a lot of forums, in a lot of discussions, in a lot of meetings around yes, but I was not participating in them as an asexual person. I was participating as an LGBTQIA+ rights advocate, for example. So today, when I go to these sessions, to these meetings, I make sure that I also say that I'm here also as an asexual person. So that has been more or less my journey with my queer identity.
Thank you, Anjali. I have a question for Michael. What were the big challenges at the beginning of AVEN? Did AVEN ever face obstacles from ace phobia or queer phobia? Would you please tell us?
Right, so I'll do my best at answering this. I should mention, by the way, that I've been in the ACE community since 2009, and AVEN was founded in 2001, so I was not there right from the start, but I have a fairly good idea of the early issues. And I think originally it was very similar to what other people here have been saying, actually finding people and I think Dia mentioned that at first it's really difficult to find other people, and it was really only the internet that made this possible in the first place. I think asexuality was something that slipped through the cracks a lot, just because you kind of get this double reaction of, oh, that's just really strange, and oh, you can't be asexual. But you get this sort of second reaction of, that's just normal. That's not even worth talking about, and that it's just like everybody is. I mean, I think probably women get that more than men, actually. That it's sort of like almost normal or ideal, and I think that was quite a barrier, because it held up our acceptance within the LGBT community for a long time, because it was asexuality wasn't seen as quite having the same issues. It wasn't not oppressed in the same way as the LGBTQ spectrum was. And when I was at university in the early 2000s, there was no indication of asexuality, and it's not that they were unreceptive to it, it's just it was not on their radar at all. It was lesbian, gay, and in fact even trans was hardly on their radar, and asexuality even less. The things have improved a lot since then. The other thing I know that was a very big burning issue in the early asexual community was actually from within the community. There was a lot of infighting about who was allowed to call themselves asexual. Do you have to have very, very prescriptive things like you must never have had sex, you must not have a libido, you must be repulsed by the idea of sex, a very, very narrow conception, even from within the community, of what asexuality was about. And it took quite a long time to kind of broaden out and become more inclusive. And it's still something we're struggling with, to be honest, that asexuality is actually a big spectrum of different behaviors. So to me, those were the main barriers that I'm aware of.
Thank you, Michael. Actually, so true. These issues, I have no idea about the Western region, but here it's haywire, all these issues. If somebody comes out as an asexual, all of a sudden the first question they're going to get, well, you were in a relationship, you know? So yeah, such a good point. Thank you. Okay, let's move on to our next topic. So when and where did you first learn about asexuality? Can we start with Gary?
So I first found out about asexuality when I was 14. So this was in like late 2003 to maybe 2004. An internet friend mentioned asexuality on her life journal and posted a link to AVEN. And I decided to click it and had a read about asexuality. And at that time, I thought the concept made sense to me. And eventually, by the time when I was 16, I realized that it applied to myself. I only joined the AVEN forum later on when I was 19 though. So yeah, as I said earlier, the concept didn't really of sexuality just wasn't as much of an issue in my life at all in my teens. When I was still at high school, it was only really relevant a bit later on because of, I guess, social conservatism in terms of attitudes towards sex and relationships.
Thank you, Gary. Anjali? When and where? Yeah.
And so, yeah, for me, the first time I came across the word asexuality was maybe around 2004, 2005. Actually, I was just going through, it was a popular science magazine. And there was one article where there were interviews with asexual persons, and where, they were describing asexuality. And I think it was representatives from AVEN at that time who were interviewed for this article. And it was the very first time that I came across this sexual orientation, and I realized that nobody ever told me that this existed. And you have this kind of, the first reaction, like, okay, this exists and nobody told me. And then when you start thinking about it, and after I was maybe 14, 15 at that time, and then as time went by, this article kind of stayed with me. And when I was questioning my identity, I realized that you don't have to identify yourself just as heterosexual, homosexual, or bisexual, but you can also identify yourself as an asexual person. So I think that was my very first encounter with the word and with the with this sexual orientation. It was that article. Actually, surprisingly, recently I was just tidying up my things, and I found the first cutting from that article, and I think that was my very first.
Stayed with me, and today I go back to it, I see a lot of things that were not said at that time. For example, most of the people who were interviewed were mostly men, were mostly people from the USA, they were white people. So today you might be thinking of it from a diversity and inclusion perspective that wasn't there at that time. Just like today we think about the A spectrum rather than just asexuality. We think about multiple labels, for example, which were not talked about at that time. So, but it was for me at that time from a person from Mauritius who had absolutely no other access to resources. It was a very good beginning.
I see. Thank you, Anjali. Sarah, please. We can't hear you.
Sarah, you're on mute.
She was waiting for something to pass, I think. You're muted.
Okay.
She's waiting
We'll
something.
go on. We'll ask you later. Okay. Sophia, would you please share with us?
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
So hold on, sorry.
Okay.
Sorry, just to clarify, the question was another, right?
When and where did you first learn about asexuality? You can find the question in the chat section. Yeah.
I think I managed to slip by answering that question earlier. A friend of mine randomly told me after I kept talking about my own experience in regards to social cultural expectations in romance and sex. My friend randomly told me, I believe you might be asexual, and it just became a rabbit hole of me searching to understand what made them call me that. And eventually it's a stockpile of everything I've found online, communities in many online places. And thankfully, I was surrounded already with friends who are quite active in the queer space. They're not asexual or not in the A-Spec, but they were very active in queer spaces and have been quick to accept me and even help me on their own way in discovering myself more. So I was just really lucky in that part.
Okay.
Yeah, that's it.
Right. Thank you. Pat, you share with us?
Yeah, like Sophia, I also talked about it a little bit in my introduction. And it's actually hard for me to remember if I heard it first through doing research at school or when I was just browsing on Tumblr. This was back in the early 2010s. And Tumblr was kind of where a lot of these memes and definitions and like hearts and flags and stuff were going up. And I was like, oh, what is this? And I kind of went into that rabbit hole of, okay, this sounds kind of interesting. Let me learn more. But I didn't first identify with that. I was like, this sounds like really relatable, but I don't think I want to pick that label yet. So it took some time there, I think, to come to the realization, oh no, it's relatable to me personally.
Thank you. Sarah, can you share with us now? Okay. Dia, please.
So my story is a bit like Pat's, but instead of Tumblr, it was Instagram. There was like, Instagram Explore page. There was like memes and like simple definitions. And then after that, I went to Google, tried researching more, but didn't find anything that could help because, like I said, I cannot open the AVEN website. And then for Indonesian websites, they are very scientific and like more of the health side of things instead of the more detailed explanation about the labels and the micro labels and everything. And so I went back to Instagram. I followed like ACE accounts and I found out more through memes rather than Google searches.
Sarah, no? Okay. Okay, we can move on to our next topic then. Do you have adequate resources available for understanding or explaining asexuality in your native language? If yes, how useful are these resources in terms of education and awareness? If not, how do you suppose the general layman population of your country can understand these concepts? I would put the question in the chat box down below so that everyone can see. It's a bit of an elaborate question. Yes. Is the question clear? Okay. Who would like to go
For
first?
more of wondering who should.
I'm sorry, Sophia.
I'll try to go first.
Okay.
I was mostly wondering who would want, which of the others would like to go first.
Right.
So the Philippines actually is, unlike most Asian countries, the Philippines is almost considers English as the second language already. So honestly, it's a bit of a mix of yes or no, because almost technically majority of the population of the Philippines are capable of English. But this is not, I will not deny that, because the country is an archipelago and there's many regions that even we have different languages in different areas. It's not even close to the main language of Tagalog. It's each region has their own language. So even though a lot of the people are capable of English, I don't think there's enough resources for everyone's own native languages. And I don't personally, I'm struggling to understand as well on how to like localize, to explain this, to explain asexual, because even though we do have terms for gay or lesbian, these are they have their own connotations, they have their own meaning on what they are. Like bakla or gay is different from us. It's like if I go off, it's gonna take up too much time, and I want to be able to give the others some time. So basically, it's going to be hard. And the only way that I personally can think of trying to explain asexuality or properly explaining any other queer term is by first introducing it as what it is commonly known, and then from there we try to piece it out, because there's really not an exact term, not even for just one language, since the Philippines has different languages in each region. So it's going to be a struggle, but yes, they need to start with at least English, and then we can try to piece it up locally, because the whole country has their own languages and terminologies and connotations between what can be used. That's in what I've seen from what I've seen.
Right. You mean different regions of the country has different dialects? Is that what you try to mean?
Frankly, I've it's still a discussion I'm trying to ask as well before with my teachers. It's the language, they're too distinct to be just called dialects. They're not they're dialects, but to an extent that they can be considered as a language of their own, especially because completely different cultures and completely set of words. We're an archipelago, and to the point that the common language is only centralized usually in the city, and everyone is mostly using a different language for their daily lives.
I see. Thank you. Sarah,
Yes,
please.
I apologize for the technical difficulties before. I literally could not click to unmute my microphone before, so that's why I couldn't speak. I'm just nodding. Was the question about resources being in different languages? Was that what the question was?
Yes,
just to make sure.
You can find the question in the chat box as well, by the way.
It doesn't appear for me because I left and came back. But anyway,
Can
I was
you
nodding.
repost it?
Yeah, it's about.
Basically, I was nodding a lot to what Sophia was saying, to be honest, because it's something I haven't mentioned is that I came across the Filipino ACEs group, I think a few months ago, and I've learned it's a really interesting thing that being engaged with the ACE community and particularly Filipino ACE community is I've learned so much more about my culture and my family's culture through it as a kind of an unexpected thing. And I was nodding a lot to what Sophia was saying is that it's really important to consider the sort of cultural context, but also the language is going to be different. So for example, like the word bakla, in terms of what it's meaning, it doesn't translate to what we say using English, let's say in the UK. So I just kind of really wanted to say that. But the other thing is even as somebody who is of Asian ethnicity in a country like the UK, the context for me is going to be different. As a context for people like me is also going to be different as well. So although we can have to take into account this culture, it's the fact that I'm experiencing my family's culture in a different context. And that's something that's also really important to take into consideration. And the fact I am an ethnic minority in the country I live in too.
Correct. Anjali, would you share with us?
So for me, the answer is really simple. There is absolutely no resource on asexuality in the native language in Mauritius, because even though the official language is English, people speak mostly French and Mauritian Creole, and there's absolutely no resource on asexuality in our native language. I mean, even in English and French, you won't really find any resource on asexuality in Mauritius. And so how can we, so how can the general layman population understand the concept? I think that every time I have done community sensitization sessions on SOGIES for a very wide and very diverse groups, I mean, for students, for elderly people, for working people, I mean, every time when I've mentioned asexuality, it was something that they have never heard of. And so I think the first thing is really to get started talking about asexuality and to say what it means. Because, I mean, independently of in what language you do it, in English, in French, or in Creole, the first thing is really to start talking about it, because most of the people here have not even heard of the term and much less of the definition. So that's, I suppose, the first thing. And then how to get people to understand it. I think there's something that's that I've noticed is because Mauritius is still a very conservative society, and where you have a few, the influence of religion and some religious values, where, for example, sex outside marriage is still stigmatized, where you know, young people are not expected to have sex before marriage. So when you talk about asexuality, people always have this tendency to understand asexuality in the sense that it's abstinence. And, you know, when you say, for example, that when you give the definition of, for example, demi-romantic, and people would be saying that, yeah, it's the right way that things should be, that you should have an emotional connection before having a sexual connection. But what people fail to understand, that it's not about prescribing a certain type of behavior in society. It's about how a person is and how a person identifies. So I think that's one of the obstacles that you might have today in Mauritius if you try to explain asexuality to people. And then the other thing is that people kind of tend to think of asexuality as a handicap, that because you can't experience sexual orientation, because you don't experience sexual orientation, they say it as the fact that you can't experience something, and that's why you are lacking in something. And so I think that's, even though if we start explaining to people asexuality in a native language, we have to kind of deconstruct the notion of asexuality to separate it from these cultural and social thinkings, so that people have a better understanding of it, and they don't see it as, for example, a kind of abstinence, a kind of social behavior, or kind of handicap.
Right. That's true. Asexuality in my country is also understood as something of a phase, you know, maybe you had a breakup or something, so you're just going through a phase, or you didn't find your right person. So I understand that actually. Thank you. That abstinence concept, right? Carrie, would you please share with us?
So back in the day when I first found about asexuality, I didn't really put much effort into looking for Chinese resources because it was very hard to type Chinese on my old computer back then. But yeah, that was quite a long time ago now. I did notice that on AVEN there was a link to a Chinese forum, but there wasn't much activity on it. But in more recent years, I have tried to look for Chinese information about asexuality, and the impression I get is that what's out there is mostly just the very basic information that's translated from English, and there are also some inconsistencies in the translation for some terms, which makes the search for information more difficult. So for context, similar to what Sophia said earlier about the Philippines, most people in Hong Kong also know some English because they learn it at school, but not everyone speaks it fluently. And proficiency in English is generally correlated with education achievement and socioeconomic status. And Chinese language resources are therefore needed for quite a large part of the population. And for further context, the written Chinese language is the same as mainland China, although there are, yes, traditional and simplified scripts as well. But the spoken language is Cantonese, which is a dialect that's not shared with the rest of China. Further to this issue is that the formal terms for sexual orientations in the Chinese language conflate sex and romance. So the word for asexuality is 冇性戀, which literally means no gender love. So it is more difficult to explain the distinction between asexuality and aromanticism. And I think the split attraction model is very important because the practical issues faced by an aromantic asexual person who may prefer to remain single are going to be different from those faced by an asexual person who is looking for a romantic relationship with an understanding partner.
Right. Yes, that distinction seems to be a huge problem actually. Dia, please share with us. Dia?
Okay, so Indonesia is also an archipelago like the Philippines, and also like them, we have a lot of like different, how to say this, different kind of like regions also have different languages, and from West Indonesia to East Indonesia, they could be totally different. But thankfully, I think almost all of us speak Indonesian as the native language. And as for adequate resources, I would say there are none, because there are a few articles on several websites that explain about asexuality, but only scientifically and in a very clinical terms. And there are also very basic translations from the English. And as for resources in English, not a lot of people in Indonesia speak very fluent English. There are also quite a lot that barely understands English. Maybe some who doesn't understand English at all. And it's also as I've said before, and me and my three friends, we are trying to create Indonesian resources in people-friendly Indonesian language. And yeah, it's still going on.
Okay. As long as it's going on, that's a huge step. Pat.
Yeah. So I grew up in Canada, so English kind of technically is one of my first languages, but at home I speak Cantonese and Mandarin. And another Chinese dialect as well. So in that language, I would say that I only recently learned the words that Carrie was talking about, like describing asexuality, and because I was part of a Asian diaspora group who also is queer inclusive in Canada. And so we had a language cafe where we were practicing Cantonese, and then we were talking about like, oh, can you describe about your gender and your sexuality in Cantonese? And so all of us were doing some Google searching and like looking through the dictionary to find these words. And like Carrie said, it's very limited. It only talks about sexuality, not romanticism. And a lot of the words come from biology as well. So it's like they use the word for like asexual like reproduction from biology, which are applying to like single cell organisms, and they apply it to people. So it's like a little bit weird that way, but it's like this is the best we have so far. But yeah, I guess I'm very lucky to have a lot of resources in English. And now I think the discussion has moved more towards the specific labels rather than the big label of asexuality in English.
Yeah.
So the conversation is so different already.
Right. Thank you. Well, here in Bangladesh, I would say, honestly, Anwaka was probably the first platform I found that used our native language Bangla to talk about asexuality. So I was in an American ace group. So then that's where I found Epiphania visuals. And we started talking about, you know, ace and queer and asexuality. And that's how we got to know about each other's asexuality. And that's the only page I found where asexuality has been spoken about, and that too in Bangla. So we don't have a lot of literature, maybe some indirect literature, but not a lot of direct literature. I mean, in Bangladesh, it's a very taboo topic, you know, to talk about sexuality at all. Even straight sexuality is extremely taboo to talk about. So you can imagine asexuality. So yeah, it's a quite long road ahead of us, I would say. Okay, I have a question for Michael. When AVEN started, there were no educational materials related to asexuality, and AVEN took the initiative to start creating this content. Can you tell us what that was like?
Yeah, so like I've already mentioned, I was not there right at the start of when AVEN was founded. What I understand is that so David J was the founder of AVEN, and I think he basically just put up a web page on his personal like university web page, like he had like a personal space, and he put up a web page, just a single page saying asexuality is the lack of sexual attraction, and just put it out there. I mean, and probably wasn't even expecting people to take it up. Then he got emailed by people who said, that applies to me, and that applies to me. And then it kind of just snowballed from there. So I think that, you know, it's great. I think that if of course I can't speak for other contexts and the situations in other countries, but I think that even just putting something out there, just a simple web page in the language could be a start of a great thing. And make sure people can contact you, and you know, it might snowball from there. The other thing is that as we're talking about early AVEN history, it should mention that AVEN was not the very first resource for asexuality. Unknown to David.
Michael, I think yeah.
Oh, okay, sorry. I was just saying that when AVEN was founded, there was also a group called Haven for the Human Amoeba, and soon they've kind of joined forces. So somebody called Nat Titman from that group helped David J write the first FAQ. And I think that having the FAQ was really crucial, because that allowed, you know, people come along with really with really sort of very basic questions about what is asexuality and how do I fit in and am I asexual and that sort of thing. And I think that the FAQ, which David J and Nat Titman wrote between them, was really crucial for getting that going. And then, of course, there were the discussion forums, which you know, it's a great way of building a community. This was rather a long time ago, so you're now not limited just to the forums, but you have like Facebook groups or other social media platforms. Yeah, and I think that's how it all started. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you so much. That does. Thank you. Okay. What is the condition of asexuality awareness, LGBTQ knowledge, safety, and overall attitude towards asexuality in your country? Who would like to go first? Anybody?
Sure, I can go
Hey.
first.
Hey.
Asexuality awareness, I don't know that it's necessarily really broad in Canada, but there are definitely lots of individuals, small communities online that talk about it, and that group together. So like meetup groups or Discord communities, that kind of thing, or forums and that. So in terms of LGBTQ knowledge, I think more broadly speaking, it's quite good because it's legal to talk about here. And so there's a lot of people who kind of do awareness pieces. There's campaign, there's Pride Month every June. So I think relatively overall, it's quite safe to talk about. Overall attitude towards asexuality, I don't think enough people know about it for them to really comment. I would say, personally speaking, coming from an Asian family, within that, the attitude towards asexuality so far has been like, okay, but like, when are you getting married? Is kind of the focus there. I don't know if anybody, so the question isn't even if you're gonna get married. They like,
Right.
especially aunties always go asking like, oh, like yeah, like when are you gonna get married? So I think that attitude, like they don't care what your orientation is. The things they care about is like, when are you getting married? When are you having kids?
Right. That's so true, actually. If I come out to my parents as, you know, I identify as demisexual, they're going to be so happy. They're like, oh, you're just never attracted to a lot of people, right? That just works out perfectly well. So even then, they won't understand that I identify, you know, as demisexual or as a part of the asexual spectrum. So I understand what you said. It's always about the wedding. So okay, we get it. When are you gonna get married? It's a phase again. So yeah, Carrie.
So as far as I know, asexuality is mostly unknown amongst the general population in Hong Kong. There's information about asexuality in their local family planning association website. There's acknowledgement of asexuality as a sexual orientation in legislation about sexual offenses. And I think some LGBTQ organizations welcome and support asexual people, but I couldn't find any specific asexual groups. And that's why I'm here talking about Hong Kong, even though I don't live there. So due to its colonial history, Hong Kong has a combination of influence from both the East and the West. And as such, there are issues with sexualization in media and advertising, while there are also the issues with sexual shame and avoidance of serious discussions about the topic, which I think are in some ways worst of both worlds in terms of asexual awareness. So mainstream Hong Kong culture is very much success driven. And while a lot of it is about career and financial success, it also includes having a romantic partner and eventually getting married and have children. So as I said, I don't live there, but if I did, I think there would be plenty of people who would consider me a loser for being single, even though I'm single by choice. With that being said, with my current career, I could mostly deflect stigma by claiming to be dedicated to my career, but yeah, that only goes so far, and obviously that's not always an option for other people. So in terms of LGBTQ knowledge, I think most people only know about gay and lesbian, maybe bisexual, but less about transgender. And while I don't think there's a lot of physical violence, the stigma and casual homophobia is definitely there. But at the same time, apparently, statistically, there is a majority who support same-sex marriage, but it is not yet legalized. So it's also kind of, even though it's got Western influences, it's still further behind in terms of that kind of progress, I suppose.
Right. Thank you, Gary. Tia, would you like to share with us?
As for awareness and knowledge in Indonesia, the majority of the people are Muslims, and they are not a big fan of those who are not straight and allos.
Right.
And yeah, and asexuality is sometimes also mixed up with, actually not sometimes, it's most of the time, mixed up with abstinence. And because the people are very religious, as for when you are still teenagers or like 20s, they still consider that if you're asexual, then maybe you're just abstinent, you're just waiting for until marriage or things like that, because dating is also looked down upon, as I've said before. But when you're already in your 30s, they are also going to start asking, like, when are you getting married? When are you having kids? And things like that. As for those who are not straight and allos, it's a big no for Indonesians. Some people are also very hostile.
Yeah.
The homophobic people are scary. And yeah, even talking about sex in general is also considered taboo. That's why the sex education in Indonesia is, I don't think there's like a government issued sex education. It all depends on where you live, where you go to school, like how open-minded your parents are. And yeah, so knowledge are not widely spread. And yeah, based on where, like I said, where do you live, who are your parents, where do you go to school, and things like that.
Right. Sarah. Okay, we'll come back to you later.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's happened again.
We can hear you.
Oh, can you? Because I basically the buttons on my screen just keep disappearing, so I might have to leave after saying this. So my perspective, I think, is very similar to Pat's in that I grew up in the UK. I think there's been a general raise in awareness of asexuality over the years, to the point that, so I work with schools, and that young people know about asexuality, and some are identifying as A-Spec. And that's really wonderful and heartwarming to me that young people have more knowledge of that nowadays in comparison to where we were at school. But I also, just thinking about my own family in terms of LGBTQ plus awareness, they might know what lesbian is, like may not know what I mean by gay, maybe bisexual, probably not fully understanding what it means to be trans. So I do a podcast with 3 of my cousins who are Filipino and live in the US. And one of them talked about being non-binary and talking to the family about being non-binary. And their response was, do you mean lesbian? As that. And yeah, so sometimes these conversations can be quite difficult with family members. There was one family member I came out to, just thinking about the conversations about marriage. After coming out to his family member a couple of hours later, they said, so you're not having children then? And there's a thing of, well, once you get married, the children question will come up. I assure you, if this is somebody who is married. So yeah, so it can be, but for that family member, I didn't mind spending the time because I had that kind of trust with that particular family member and talked to them about it. And I knew they wouldn't get it straight away. And that's the thing, I kind of went in with that expectation. Whereas for most of my family, I wasn't very keen about coming out to them for a long time because they'll make assumptions. They'll make assumptions about me. They'll make assumptions about my husband. They'll also gossip. I also had a cousin who was outed, and basically people talk, and and I just didn't want to go through that kind of same experience. And I'm talking particularly about what's happened in my family. It's not the same with others. But yeah, it's so just kind of thinking from that perspective of like the kind of context I'm coming from. But yeah, that tends to be kind of the sort of attitudes from my family. I think Sophia would probably be able to bring more perspectives of what it's like in the Philippines, but that's just to say, no, you can, because I know you'll be able to, but a lot better than me because I am coming from a UK context. But yeah, that's just kind of my experience with my family. And I guess I'm just very lucky I can talk to some family members about it, some who are also LGBTQ plus, but for the rest of them, I just can't be bothered with that conversation, so I'd rather just not talk about it.
Same here, actually. I would just rather not go through the whole process of explaining who I am, because they will never get the connotation. So let's just not go through that. Let's just stay a child. So yeah. Anjali.
So in Mauritius, actually, the awareness around LGBTQ knowledge really started when there was this whole discussion about HIV/AIDS. So when they started working on HIV/AIDS in Mauritius, that's when they realized that they needed to spread more awareness around LGBTQIA+ issues. And even at that time, it was more about LGBT issues. So that's when this awareness started. And most of the time, unfortunately, asexuality was left out of the discussions. And even today, when we're talking about safety, when we're talking about consent, about violence, about intimate partner violence, for example, we almost never talk about asexuality. And of course, there are situations when we're talking about well, we've all been talking about how people have this expectation from us to get married, to have children. And unfortunately, in some couples, when we're talking about in Mauritius for a very long time, rape within marriage was not criminalized. And so that made it even more difficult for asexual persons to, first of all, have more access to resources on their identity, but at the same time to be protected. For example, within marriage, if someone is an asexual person and they are in a marriage, they can still be forced to have sexual relationships. And for a very long time, that was not criminalized under Mauritian law. And even today, it's not criminalized as such. It just enables the person to get a protection order, but without the act being criminalized in itself. So that's most of the difficulties that we have today. And when we're talking about the attitudes about asexuality, I think it's more or less the same that what Sarah and Dia and you have said about how people have this expectation from you to get married, to be in a relationship. And then when you get to a certain age, the questions become more pressing from your relatives and everyone. And then there's when you are in such a situation, there's also who would you take the time to speak to guide them through the process of understanding your identity, because you would have a lot of people that you might see once a year, but then they would be more invested in your personal lives than people you would be seeing every day, and you won't be taking the same energy and the same time to speak to them about asexuality and to explain your identity. And then there's also this question about having to explain time and again your identity, that at some time it becomes tiring, and you feel like you have to justify yourselves every time why you are not in a relationship, why you are not married, why you don't have kids, when it's really something that's personal to you. And so yeah, that makes it difficult, and that the fact that people are not talking about sexuality, about asexuality and sexuality in general in Mauritius, that's barriers for people, for asexual people, when it comes to living their lives fully in Mauritian society.
Right. Thank you. Sophia.
Hello. Yes.
Hey.
As almost everyone, I would agree. Especially, I relate the most with Gary and from Dea. The Philippines in itself is dominantly Catholic, or I suppose Christian. Abrahamic religion is the most dominant in the country. The three most common religions here is Catholic, Muslim, Islam, and Christians, and the various forms of it. The thing is, the Philippines has been under Spanish colony for 3 centuries, which heavily ties the country's religious beliefs, not just in religion. Actually, it has become a social cultural. It's implanted in the social cultural aspect. They have attitudes or beliefs that are not really traditionally tied into what most Christian practitioners share, that are being tied into the daily lives because of the way the Spanish government at the time were trying to use religion as a way to control the population. And because of that, it has translated into the modern times and it has been a part of our culture, even though they keep tying it to religion. With that said, our country, although there's a lot of things you see in the news that we have the most gay people, it's not exactly that good in here. The condition is kind of like this. A family member would say, gay people can be gay, they can be themselves. But if they find out a family member is gay, they could beat that
Right.
person up. That person can get kicked out, or they would say, oh, I was about to say something in my language. You need Jesus or something like that. Basically, anything that is, this isn't just a matter of religion. It has to become a matter of conservatism. That's what this is. So if that's the attitude towards LGBT in general, what's more to say with asexuality, which is already considered a minority within the minority? Although in recent years, people have been becoming more open with access to the internet, and with globalization, people are starting to learn more about LGBTQ. We even have some bits of lessons in class about the basic definition of lesbian, gay, bisexual, but it's very, very surface level. It's like gay men who are attracted to other men, like just that. So there has been moves of it, but because the country is very religious and conservative, it's very limited what they try to say. And even then, they still can't fathom gender identity because it's tied to religion. Until now, although there has been movements in trying to protect. Hello.
We can hear you.
Hello?
We can hear you.
Oh, okay. Sorry, everyone was frozen, so I thought my internet was cut off. So following up on what I said, people's attitude on LGBT, even though in recent times there's more openness. We even have a bill that we're still working on. It's called the SOGI bill. It's an acronym. Which is Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity Expression. That basically the bill is just protecting the queer community from any sort of discrimination, not just from the general population, but even from work. That's one of the things they're working with. Even until now, it's still being filed to be approved since all the way back from, I believe, 2000. It was first filed in the 2000s, and until now, it's still in the works. They're still trying to match it because the ties to the religious sector is very, very big.
Right.
So putting that into perspective, most people's conservative idea regarding to love and sex or relationship, it's usually tied with marriage, correct? So with that in mind, asexuality is almost like, if you don't tell them the term asexuality, they'll, as the others would say, it's like celibacy. Like, that's good. Wait for the right person. They cannot fathom the idea of just not wanting it. So
Right.
honestly, if you ask me, I think they're just, if I tell them the concept, they just get mad at me because it's almost as if they feel like, what do you mean you're not struggling of not having sex before marriage? I'm doing my best to control. Why are you doing this? I think that's what's happening. But yeah, people, at least in people who are privileged enough to have access to the queer community online, this is what only I noticed, because I can't speak for everyone in my country because we have different regions, we have different privileges. I was privileged enough to be able to understand and have access to the internet that is wide and could help me unlearn all of this and to accept it. To others, they don't, because if I wasn't able to learn about this, I would just keep thinking that I'm supposed to have sex. I'm supposed to get married, because honestly, despite being very religious in this country, despite being like You should live a Christian life with a partner, with a family, make a family, especially because I'm AFAB. I have to have a family of my own to support. Um, because of that, the concept of sexuality that just doesn't cross well with people, much less LGBT. So it's not that safe. Even now, I'm scared because I'm in my parents' house. I tried to go to the rooftop. So I'm sorry if I keep looking out. I'm trying to make sure no one else is here to listen to me. I'll try not to drag. I'm sorry. TLD. To sum it all up, the attitude towards LGBT in general, including asexuality, is extremely conservative. They say they support it, but they don't actually want it anywhere near them.
Thank you, Sophia. Well, in my country, don't even speak about it. Don't even speak about LGBTQ at all. But there's this understanding everybody has that as long as you're doing what you're doing in private and nobody knows, we're good. But don't ask for tolerance and don't ask for acceptance, and definitely don't ask us to celebrate you. That's not a thing at all. It's such a taboo. As I said, even straight sexuality is a huge taboo. You can't speak about it unless you go to the doctor. You can't. So LGBTQ is a very, very, very repressed topic. Culturally, philosophically, and even politically. And I would say even emotionally. A lot of people, they don't want to even accept themselves that, hey, I might not have this need for, sex, or I might not be attracted to people. Even they don't accept that to themselves. Like me, I didn't want to accept this to me for, at least I would say 10 years. I didn't just want to accept that, hey, I am just not like these people, asexual people. So I knew about asexuality, and as some of you guys said, Tumblr was a huge resource, through memes and through the aesthetics you get to know. So thank you, Tumblr. Instagram a bit, but I guess my algorithm in Instagram is different. But mostly through Tumblr and mostly through Reddit. Reddit was a huge source, by the way, Reddit. And but I just never wanted to accept. I was like, okay, I'm happy with my partner, I got my fairy tale. No, I did not, but it's still a different thing, being with a partner and identifying as a demisexual or whatever. It's still two different topics. And I knew it, I just never wanted to accept it. I'm just talking about me. And in general, in my country, I think nobody wants to think about their sexuality as a different topic. Like this can be a thing you think about. They just think, oh, you're just born and you just get married. You just have relationships and then you find your person and then you get married and you just have kids. So no one thinks about it as a separate topic in their own life, that it can be a choice, that it can be something to think about, okay, what is it about me? Why am I doing this? Do I have to? No one thinks like that. And LGBTQ awareness is there. I would say the transgender community has more tolerance than gay and bisexual and lesbian community, but asexuality is not a term anyone ever speaks about, ever. It's something people just accept that, oh, okay, I don't have it. But they don't have the proactivity to, come out and form a forum or an organization. As I said, Anwaka is the first one I heard of. Even I never heard anyone ever speak that, hey, I don't have I don't feel attraction towards anybody. I never heard anybody say that. It's like everybody is waiting for somebody special. So yeah, that's the situation here. Thank you so much. We can move on to our next question. Yeah, sure, please, Sophia, please.
I just wanted to add really quick. I'm sorry. I talked a lot and I forgot to insert an important thing. Another thing to consider, because I was too focused on explaining the LGBT part, I wasn't able to explain a very important part in regards to asexuality in general here. The country mostly here the people are very, I could relate to what you say, that people just generally think get a partner. It's almost like default.
Yeah.
It's the same here as well. Like it's almost to the point wherein when people make jokes, it's always about not having a partner. Their jokes is always about I'm single, or like it's always that.
Yeah.
We call them hugots, or like hugots are like lines of like jokes of comparing their misfortunes by connecting it to not having a partner, and it's like, I wish I had a partner, things would have been better. It's like very clever lines, kind of like, I wish the light of my life was like my flashlight, always on for me, or something. I don't know. So you can sense that there's a high pinnacle of romance in everywhere you go.
It's a status
So
symbol.
just the idea of you not, yeah, exactly. So the idea of someone not being of just being happy not finding someone, they're like, it's either you're lying, or if you find someone, you'd start acting like us too. So
Right.
that's the general
So
idea.
true.
Just
Yeah,
wanted
it's
to
like,
add that.
exactly. It's like if I tell my friends that, you know, I'm demisexual, or I'm on the asexuality spectrum, first of all, they're going to be like, what? Okay. Second of all, they're going to be like, wait till you get into a relationship. It's like, wait till you're just single. You know, life happens. Even my friends, the most open-minded people I know, they're going to be like that. So at this point, I don't know if asexuality is about the illiteracy about it, or it's like people just don't get it. They just don't get it. That I feel like maybe we're such a small minority, people just don't grasp the idea that some people simply don't feel the sexual attraction, definitely not at their level. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, there's also something like what Sophia said in Indonesia, like I forgot the word for this. Wait. Okay, so back in high school, whenever we have an exam, like some of the teachers would say like, if you cheat, you're gonna be single forever. And I felt like, what if I wanna be single forever? Then am I allowed to cheat then? Or like, if you cheat, you're never gonna be able to have kids. And I was like, okay, so I have your permission to cheat then? Things like that.
Yeah, that's funny, but that's also unfortunate. But that's funny. Thank you for sharing all this. Okay, moving on to the next topic. Many grassroots activists from Asia are not sufficiently comfortable in English in order to participate in symposiums like the one we're having. How can we overcome the language barrier to come together? This can be a group discussion.
I honestly don't know. Short of teaching Indonesians the English language, I don't know.
Yeah, where firstly, this really draws attention to the need for resources in local languages. I mean, I have participated with International Asexuality Day, and also with Aurea, but that's more a romantic focus. But yeah, I try to help with translating content, but I could really do with more people helping with that, because I don't actually have that much free time on my hands. But for those of us who can, yeah, translating content to local languages is really useful. Short of that, I guess finding, but I do draw the line in interpreting. Like if I were to invite somebody to speak here in Cantonese, I wouldn't want to have to interpret that. That's a specialized skill. That's a lot harder. I am fluent enough in Chinese to be able to translate in my own time, but even that takes quite a long time. I'm not as, having lived away from Hong Kong was like 16 years, I'm not as fluent as I think I am, even though it's my first language.
Yeah,
Definitely agree though on struggling.
Yes, same. I mean, it's like translating requires such a level of formality that is so difficult to acquire. So yeah, I understand. Who else has?
I'm sorry if I may intervene.
Yes, please.
Yeah, I think that one of the good things that have come out of this pandemic is that, you know, we've been having a lot of online online conferences, online symposiums, and there's this possibility, and sometimes when you're having these online gatherings, that you have the possibility of having live interpretation, because in a lot of the conferences I've attended, for example, the recent one I had attended was the Pan-Africa International Lesbian and Gay Association Conference. And you had the possibility of following the conference, for example, in English, in French, and in Portuguese. So if, for example, someone was not fluent in English and the speakers were speaking in English, they had the possibility of listening to it in French. So I think that was one of the tools that we can use to overcome this language barrier. And I think that there's not just a language barrier. Sometimes there's an accessibility barrier, in the sense that I've seen very few conferences, for example, who had sign language interpreters, for example, so that, you know, to make these conferences more accessible to people, and to make it more inclusive. So I think that we have to explore the opportunities that digital tools are giving us today to have more inclusive spaces.
Right. Since Anjali brought it up, I also, at least in my country, I would say there's another barrier, which is comprehension barrier. So you can tell people about asexuality, the absence of sexuality, they're going to be like, oh, you need to go to the gynecologist. It's a medical issue. You're frigid. Okay, so, or they're going to make you, oh, you need to visit, you need to consult with somebody, right? It's said in a very demeaning way, like something is extremely wrong with you. So they might understand that, oh, she doesn't feel sexual attraction, but they will not understand that it's normal and it's perfectly fine, and that there's nothing wrong about it. There's nothing, you know, medical going on. So comprehension barrier, I would say, is a huge thing for us, for the cool people in our country, the cool people who get it, the people who understand it, but they will not understand it completely, because I would say they don't want to understand it. It's like there's a level of sympathy they feel for us, like, oh, you don't want a partner? I mean, you know what I mean? So comprehension is a huge thing in my country for even people who, even people who get it. So yeah, I have a question for Michael. Just as there are language barriers in Asia, many European countries also do not have English as their first language. So how do you how does AVEN overcome language challenges when reaching out with awareness campaigns and educational content to these countries? How does AVEN do that? We'd like to hear from you.
So I should first of all say that we're very we're not we could do a lot better in this regard. In fairness, most of our resources are predominantly English language, and that's partly because a lot of us associated with AVEN only really speak English. What we have done is that AVEN does actually host forums in other languages. They're not quite as large as the English language forum, but there have been. I think Kerry mentioned that there have been there was one in Chinese. I think it was Mandarin, and possibly one in Cantonese. Well, actually, as Kerry says, I don't think that it's written, so maybe that is not an issue. Sorry, what I'm saying is that there were many different forums in several languages, and some of these took off quite well, and some of them have become inactive. But at least they would then like an impetus for people to form their own forum. So sometimes maybe the forums themselves were not didn't take off, but there were people on it who said, let's organize our own forum. And that's great. We're very happy if people want to do their own thing. We will support where we can.
Yeah.
I think that we have tried to translate some of our content, but we could do a lot more in that regard, and AVEN is always happy to hear from people who can help us translate content into other languages. and as Kerry mentioned, there's also the same is true of International Asexuality Day, which is an international campaign and is really trying to be more inclusive for other languages. So we're both AVEN and International Asexuality Day are very, very happy to hear from anybody who can help with translating. The other thing is, of course, that some of our members are naturally bilingual. I mean, even though the largest AVEN forum is in English, but a lot of the people who come in there speak English, but have links with another country, and they often spread the word in their own language and will help to translate materials.
Thank you. I think we can move on to our.
I was actually wondering if I can add something in.
Yes.
Just to that. So I really like the fact that the International Asexuality Conference this year did have a panel, which was a purely Spanish speaking panel. But another thing is, in terms of translating resources to different languages, it doesn't just benefit those who are living in those different countries. It would actually potentially benefit those who are living in a diaspora as well. So thinking about immigrant families who may have moved over to, let's say, I'm going to say the UK because that's where I live. It might be really useful in terms of if they want to talk to their family about it and are they in a position where they can safely do that. Yeah. That could be another way in which those resources can be useful as well.
Right.
And that was just a start. Like it was for the International Asexuality Conference. We were very glad to have a Spanish language panel, which was led mostly by Pupi, who is also affiliated with both the conference and International Asexuality Day, Pupi from Argentina. But it's just a start. We would hope in future to have more languages at these things. Spanish was a natural starting point because there's such a large Spanish-speaking community, but we want to go further. And another thing would be to have translations. This is something we did not manage this year, to have live translations into other languages. It's kind of expensive, but it's important, so we will look into that in the future.
Right.
And also I would just kind of add a little bit more to that. When you do speak another language and you go to these conferences, do yourself a favor and the people who speak your language and email the organizers to say, hey, would there be any chance that you could have some content or some discussions in this language? That way more people know that there is a want and a need for it, and then we can encourage that to happen more often by speaking out.
Right.
Can I comment on a point that makes it so about having live translation as an option? I think first we need to create the resources in these languages, because I find one of the hardest part in any of the translation I've done is that I actually don't know how you would say that word in the Chinese language. Sometimes even more so in the aromantic context, where I'm trying to translate something, I'm like, am I actually basically taking on the task of creating this word in the language? Do we actually have a word for this? Where that becomes a whole other level of difficulty. So it's like, who am I to decide what this word is going to be for the rest of
but the thing is, that's how it happened in English. People just made up a word first, or they picked the word and they just went with it. So like, if you just do that in your language and somebody else is like, oh, maybe that's not the word I'll use, then challenge them to come up with a different word.
That's an interesting point you bring up there, because on the Aurea translation team, there are some translations they've done that I actually don't agree with, and so that's actually one thing that's making it take a long time. But on the other hand, I'm also glad that there are like other people doing that, where being the only one doing this translation task really doesn't work. You should be talking to others in your community. But if you do speak the Chinese language, I think can we talk after?
And by the way, this sounds like an awesome project. If I hadn't thought of this before, but I think an awesome project would be to write a guide for translators for each language, a guide for asexuality, translating asexuality materials into various different languages, and that would be a really great resource to have for every language.
Yes, that would be a great help. Yeah, Indo-Aspec has been struggling with a bit like language barriers, like some of you have said before, like there are words that do not exist in Indonesian, and we have to use the English term, but like explain it a bit more, and it's a bit hard.
Right. I also feel like in my country, translation and the whole having the literature in your own language will matter a lot, because a lot of people simply understand or use English as a formal language, you know, just to ask, may I come in? Thank you, please. They like English doesn't hit them. English doesn't register as personally, say, as the native language does. So if you can translate this asexuality material in our Bengali language, more people will be able to understand whether they identify with it or not. Because when they read it in English, it's like, oh, something medical, sexual attraction, something medical. You know, they don't understand or that, oh, this might be something about my personality or something about me. So yeah, having translation in native language will actually help us a lot. Okay. Actually, guys, I have an announcement. We enjoyed our conversation a lot, so it's like we have to finish our group discussion within half an hour. So because you know we told everybody it's gonna be done within 2 hours, so that's just a heads up. I mean, please feel free to talk, but that's something we're trying to do. Okay, so we can move on to our first group discussion question. Topic, I should say. Yeah. Will the unique struggles faced by A-Spec individuals in the East be overlooked if the beacon of the A-Spec movement comes only from the West? Who would like to share first?
Yeah, I think I can. Yes, I would say yes, because the East and West people have different views on different cultures, different traditions, I would say, and they are sometimes like 180 degrees from each other. They are so different, and because also the Indonesia was also colonialized by Netherlands and Japan, and the colonialization also, like, there is a region in Indonesia where trans people are normal. Like they recognize 5 different genders, that includes trans also, but they are kind of like pushed to the back of the history because of colonialization. And there are also lots of like stereotypes regarding queer people, and because also the views and the religion, most importantly, the religion plays such a big part. And some of those religions and the conservative groups, I would say the conservative groups are the one most responsible, they could be quite hostile to queer people.
Can I also comment that even talking about the East and the West may be an overgeneralization? Like each country has its own culture and history, and even within the same country, there will be differences between city and rural, and maybe in some instances quite strong divide between the lifestyles of rich people and poor people. And like, for example, based on what others here have said, I don't think Hong Kong's quite as conservative as Indonesia and the Philippines. And while there is definitely social expectation to get married and have children, people do generally get away with living normally as a single adult if one chooses to do so. Like, yes, people will be gossiping about it. Yes, your family will be pressuring you, but it's the sanctions are not to the point where it's like you'll be like completely shunned by people. Yeah, not to that extreme. So I don't think the same can be said for like all countries.
Yeah, that was a good point, actually. Anjali.
Actually, if I may add from my experience working on LGBTQIA+ issues in the African region, there's one thing that I've noticed is that there's this idea that's very much present here today in Africa that, for example, homosexuality or transgender identities are important, and that it comes from the West, and that these are ideas and ideologies from the West that are being imposed on the populations here. And I think much of the blame goes to, for example, the people who are peddling these ideas, but it's also because we as activists, we have worked for a very long time by taking the way these identities, these ideas have been phrased in the West and brought them to our country by using the same wordings, the same phrases, and the same thinkings behind it without adapting it to the specific context of our countries. And that has also, to some extent, contributed to, for example, the situation today where people are saying that homosexuality is important. And when we are talking about asexuality, if we do not today, right from the beginning of our movement, speak from a local perspective and try to situate the ideas into our local cultures, our local ways of living, our local ideas, I think that there would come to a point where people would be saying that this is something that the West is trying to impose in our country. And that that's going to be one of the major obstacles that we might have to face sometime in the future, if right from the beginning we don't start local.
Yeah.
Can I add to that? I think it's been some really, really good points made so far. But even when we do have those Western perspectives, they are still through a very certain lens, although we have gone better about improving the representation of different voices in the West. It's still very centered on very white, cis, able-bodied, middle class, and so on. And so that's the other thing to take into account, is that even the Western perspective doesn't take into account everybody who, let's say, live in like my country, the UK. It doesn't necessarily take into my perspectives. And then if we think about those intersections, the experience of, let's say, a white asexual woman is going to be different from let's say, an Asian asexual woman as well. So that's the other thing. Those intersections will also be different in those different countries on top of that. So yeah, what you were saying about, so Angeli, what you're saying about in terms of having a white, it feels like it is imposed because it is coming from those perspectives and not thinking about those cultural contexts as well.
Yeah, I would echo what Sarah was saying. It's actually very nice to be able to find like Asian asexuals and aromantic people on Discord and other online communities, because like when I tell somebody who's white and ace sometimes that, like, you know, I can't necessarily come out to everybody in my family, and like I'm not gonna necessarily explain it all, but I want to keep them in my lives. A lot of them have come to me and say before, like, oh, why don't you just like cut off your family? Like they don't deserve you. Like you should just like not talk to them. And I think it's more complicated than that. Or like even the question around marriage. It's like, what if there are asexuals who want to get married, or there's some who don't? Like, can we find a space for both those different experiences, and how complicated that can be? But yeah, I do agree that we are slowly working more towards having more different perspectives and voices included, but there's still a ways to go.
Yeah, to add on to your point there about the asexual who want to get married versus those who don't, where obviously I'm speaking as an aromantic asexual, I'm speaking from the perspective of being, well, yeah, aromantic. And my impression is that in the context of Hong Kong, for example, it would be far worse being asexual and looking for romantic relationships, because while yeah, you staying single, people as much as people gossip about you, that's more on them. It won't disrupt your life quite to the point where it's a major issue, but finding a suitable partner, then that relies far more on understanding of other people, and that's where it would get much more difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah, just to add on what Carrie was saying, I'm like on a Discord server and there's like a few hundred of us there. and it's all around how to date as an ace or arrow person. And it's been a really interesting conversation to have, because it's like, how do you have those conversations to explain to somebody who either knows a little bit about asexuality or aromanticism or not at all, like what that means in the context of dating? Like, what are they going to understand, and what are you comfortable with doing or not doing, and being able to explain that?
Sometimes even staying single in Indonesia, unlike what Carrie said, people are going to talk about you, yes, blah, blah, blah. It also happens, but there are also a few people, not just people actually, some groups that they are, how to say this? There's this thing in Indonesia where, like, if you reach a certain point in your life, a certain age, and you are not yet married, then your parents are going to find someone for you, and you're gonna get married. Thankfully, my family is not like that, but I know a few people who are thinking about it, thinking about like getting their parents to find them someone to marry, and they agree with that. I just, wow.
Yeah, whereas in Hong Kong, this would be considered fairly extreme, and like historically, obviously, this happened where I think for that to happen these days, I think that's fairly extreme, and in the very, very minority, that would definitely not be considered mainstream, if you will.
Yeah.
It's a fairly normal idea in Indonesia.
Yeah, even in Bangladesh, actually, it would be quite normal and acceptable for people that, you know, your parents just found somebody for you, and you just got married because you couldn't find somebody on your own, you know.
Yes,
so
exactly.
I mean, parents trying to introduce potential partners to their children, that happens to some extent, but ultimately I think most people still have enough freedom to just say that they met the person and decided, yeah, it's not working.
Yeah.
And there comes a point where even parents will usually just stop doing that.
No, that would happen in my country for, say, maybe 60% of people, they have some sort of freedom, but 40% of people with whom this would happen, they will not have a choice. For them, it's like, well, if this not guy, if this not this guy, then you have to choose that guy. So yeah, the other guy we chose for you. So it's kind of like that. It is rather extreme for at least those kind of people. So yeah. I think we can move on to our next topic. Does anybody want to add something else? Okay. Can a centralized A-Spec movement be capable of understanding the cultural diversity of queers around the world?
Well,
I'd like to add something for that. Oh, okay. You, Carrie?
I was going to say where like to create that understanding, you need people from around the world to actually participate, to create it first, where it doesn't just happen by itself. But yeah, it does become a bit of a chicken and the egg problem, where how do you get this started? So like there is value in having a centralized international movement, but it cannot and should not replace localized activism. Like the purpose of the international movement should be to share information and resources amongst the worldwide participants, and to help people find their local A-Spec community. And yeah, organizers of the international movement should learn from activists around the world, and they should not speak for people in other countries about issues that are like specific to them. So like, for example, the AVEN project team I know has a list of asexual activists from various countries, and like with their media requests from those countries, then they forward it to the local activists. And following this process is so important, because then by doing that, AVEN can like raise the profiles of these smaller local community group, and wouldn't be speaking over them. And yeah, so there are right ways to do it.
Right.
I definitely agree with Carrie over that. I certainly think that, I mean, because technically right now, it's a bit centralized technically, because a lot of our information is based on that, correct? And I think since it already started from there, we're progressing. We're in each country because they all have access to this. They can finally try to localize this. So I believe it's just natural to have the next step to focusing on having it localized. Because if we want, after we fixing it, after we finish fixing it in the local area, because until now we're still in the process of making people in our local areas understand the concept of asexuality. Once we finally fix that part, I believe we can form perhaps another internationally centralized A-Spec movement that have proper representations for each culture, because they would have a better understanding throughout the world before people start to understand the other cultures or other queer cultures in other countries. I believe they should first focus to start understanding that in their own local areas, which I believe we are in the correct route right now. We already have the starting point where there's a centralized information, and now we are trying to spread it locally so that all of us in our local areas can finally have a full understanding. Once we have achieved that to a certain level, we can have a proper centralized A-Spec movement with proper representations in each cultures, because they all have a good understanding of it in their own local context. That's my opinion on it, at least.
I would add like another thing to that is that I know of some people, especially like in the Indigenous Canadian communities, who are looking into their pre-colonial past to look for the language and the description of different gender and sexual identities that were experienced before we created a specific way of identifying them in English. So, and I can see that happening in other countries and other languages as well, because there might have been experiences that the word and how we define asexuality in English doesn't translate well. Like there's a word in a different language that doesn't translate exactly to asexuality, but could be similar or related in some ways. And we just haven't yet discovered or relearned it from history.
I think I know of Filipinos who are doing the same in terms of trying to learn from Indigenous groups, and also kind of, I say pre-colonial Philippines for the simplicity of saying the phrase, even though it's not a fully accurate thing, but with pre-colonial Philippines. The other thing I wanted to add here is there anything we can also learn from existing queer movements that are centralized, thinking about other identities, and also how A-Spec groups within individual countries can also join like queer movements within that country, as well as having their own local community groups. And what can we learn? Well, so I don't know the answer to this question, but can we learn from good stuff that's already happening and stuff that works?
Right.
I think that would be
if I may
for
add,
discussion for every. Go on.
sorry, no, go on. So if I may add, I think that local grassroots activism and an international centralized movement are complementary, and that one cannot function with the other. And because those who are at the local grassroots level, they are the ones who know the specific local context and the lived experiences of people in that specific context. But at the same time, having a centralized international movement gives more weight to any kind of advocacy that we might be making. And I think that it was Sarah, I think, who mentioned it at first, that there needs to be intersectionality, that we need to make place for intersectionality. And if we look at today at international queer movements, they are trying to move more and more towards intersectionality. If we look at, for example, the Commonwealth Equality Network in the UK, whose office is based in the UK, and which groups LGBT rights organizations around the Commonwealth, they try to integrate intersectionality as a very a key aspect of that movement. At the same time, I think that there needs to be, if there is an international centralized movement, it's important that whatever organization is coming there, that the organization is valued and adds value. Because sometimes what happens in these international movements is that you have those who lead and those who follow, and that everyone's voice isn't given the same weight. So I think that's one of the dangers that we need to be aware of and ensure that everyone is given the same space and the same respect in that space.
Yeah, and to just add back onto that, like hearing everybody talk about their different contexts already today, like you can already see how you can't prescribe any one way to do activism around asexuality because each of our contexts are so different.
Michael, would you like to share with us your opinion on this?
Right. So, I mean, I agree with what everybody else has said. I think that an international, to the extent that the international movement is centralized, the role should be to empower people in each country to do their to spread awareness of asexuality. I think there's a centralized movement. To the extent it's centralized, should be all about empowerment and really doing what we can to help people, but not obviously not speaking over or dictating how it should happen. Yeah. And I just to say, I also really liked Angelique's point earlier that it's, you know, it's all about creating resources that are authentic to the voices in the country. And obviously translation does play a role. Translation is important because it gives a start and it allows us to share different perspectives between different languages, but it should not be entirely about just taking English resources, translating them directly and copy pasting them into other countries. I think that, you know, the more we can have resources created by local activists that take into account local context, the better.
Yeah, thank you. I love that idea of keeping space for original content. That's important. Yes. Can the differences in literacy rate, LGBTQ acceptance rate, and general hostility towards LGBTQ issues create a chasm between Asian and Western regions if Asia tries to join the Western movement?
Can I start?
Yeah,
okay.
Discussion, please.
For Indonesia, I think yes, because there are still most Indonesians who think that LGBT is an effect, like they come from the Western globalization. Like there are lots of news articles and conservative people who said that no, LGBT is not our Indonesian culture.
Yeah.
They come from the West. They are dangerous for us.
Yeah.
And it's not our tradition. It's not us. It's not who we are. And at first we need to break that way of thinking first before we can join like the Western movement, and it will take more time.
That's an interesting point where I think from my experience on AVEN, for example, I think even within the Western asexuality movement, I think the lack of access, even there are people who self-identify as asexual, but they're not entirely accepting of other LGBTQ identities. So that has and the debate of whether asexuality should be part of the LGBTQ, that's an old debate that's had existed since like the early days of AVEN, if you will. But then like even these days, I think there are people who like they want to claim their identity as asexual, but they don't seem to be supporting the rest of the LGBTQ. And but I think as a community in the Western asexuality movement, the impression I get is that as a movement, we beyond that, we do want to be, we are part of the LGBTQ movement, but not everybody has to engage with that side of it if they don't want to. But so I think in other countries it may be that the asexuality movement that might have to stand on its own. But yeah, that's not how things should be. If you were aware, progress should be for everyone, but ideally, but that's not always possible.
That's a really nice perspective, that the reality of it, that we would like progress for everybody, but initially maybe not. Maybe it's not possible initially. I like that perspective. Thank you, Gary. We can move on to our next topic. Is it possible for Asian countries to hold open and frank discussion on LGBTQ issues with their Western counterparts, especially when they may be targeted by extremist groups for doing so?
I mean, just to start with that, some of the discussion we had before this panel actually happened was around safety and how can we ensure that our panelists are safe? You know, where is privacy for people who need privacy or aren't out publicly, and like what does that look like? So around like who's sharing their names, how much of your name, what name do you go by? You know, where is this video being shared, and kind of being able to think about all those things to be precautious, because you don't know what everybody's context is, and you need to make sure that when you are doing this activism, that if you're not comfortable with that risk, what does that look like to you? Because there's activism where you're standing outside and you're shouting at people and you're telling people things in a public space, but there's also more quiet activism that happens kind of in the smaller communities or online or in different ways that are not the same, but maybe is a safer, more natural way for you to do activism.
Yeah. Actually, I would say extremist groups, maybe it's like you have, what I understand is even for, you have to do a certain level of offense to attract their attention. It's how they portray it, like, okay, they're doing it, let them do it. But you never know what level that is. You never know. It's not like, oh, I'm gonna hold a discussion on the field and then they're gonna come after me. No, maybe they see this video somehow and they're triggered. So even though they make it look like, no, you have to be very big, do something very big, and only then will attack you. No, you never know what they consider big. So what they consider offensive. So yeah, I liked what Pat said. You have to, even before this symposium, we were all worried about, what name we're gonna use, if we wanna even do this or not. So we shouldn't be thinking about stuff like that. So yeah, thank you, Pat.
I remember having a, sorry,
please,
can I just,
please. Yes.
I know it's almost 10. One more thing that Deepa mentioned when we were talking about this before was the fact that it is in English means that it might not be accessible to people who we don't want it to be accessible to. So that was a different perspective, kind of think about the language challenge and how it can have its pros and cons.
Yeah, so right now we're hanging by a thread, that hoping they don't understand English. But a lot of sophisticated extremist terrorists, they understand English very well. Actually, they're scholars, and they're way too good. So I understand what she said, though. She's right about 90% of them. So yeah. Okay, how should Asian countries conduct an asexuality movement given the hostile political climate towards LGBTQ issues? Should we emphasize the non-sexual elements for the sake of safety? Will this make it difficult to have solidarity with the rest of the queer groups?
This is a bit hard to process as well, even as I'm reading it, but if I may.
Yeah.
Because it's also really complicated. Although in my country, the political attitude towards it is more or less at least supportive. it's the society, the social aspect that is not supported. I do believe it'll be safer, at least in my place, it'll be safer, or I mean, there's still a possibility of being discriminated, because I mean, I told my cousin I don't get crushes to challenge it, and I was told, then you're an abnormal, flat out. So I believe, yes, they won't be subjected to being beaten up or being disowned. The least that they could get is at least being reprimanded that no, sex is normal. Sex is something you should like, you would experience, or you are supposed to get married. Otherwise, you won't have a family, you won't have children, you won't have to take care of you when you're old. Like, that's the concern. It would be safer if we try to emphasize asexuality on its non-sexual elements. But yes, there's also the concern of the solidarity with LGBT, other queer movements. We are already struggling to be a part of it. And quite frankly, at this point, I'm starting to understand maybe it's best if we have our own community, which we do, maybe separate from it because of the attitude towards it, especially in our context, that any association with this queer community could really attack ours. But again, we want to solidify that we are allies. We are all together in this. We are part of the acronym, whether our acronym is there or not. We are a family. So it's really a conflict of safety and wanting to solidify that. But I suppose if we try to talk about asexuality, and the split attraction model is definitely going to be a part of discussion for that. Different kinds of attractions will be a part of that. I believe it'll act as if a gateway or a way to spread out, to lead to the discussion of LGBT. If we try to focus on asexuality, frankly, I believe that if we start with asexuality with focus on split attraction, different kinds of attraction, it would lead to greater questions and better understanding, not just in asexuality itself, but other queer identities. We are the ones analyzing it in deeper meaning, that is it just limited to sexual, aesthetic, or platonic, romantic? And it opens up to a new avenue.
To continue from what Sophia was saying, the safety aspect of it is important for in some Asian countries, given the hostility from extremists. But the issue about emphasizing non-sexual elements, it's not even just about solidarity with the rest of the queer groups, but just the fact that how do you accurately represent asexuality to everybody who's actually part of the asexuality umbrella? Like, yes, in the most simplistic understanding of it, it might just mean somebody who's that doesn't have sex, but then there's more to asexuality than that. And if you get into the nuances of attraction versus behavior, where the concern is more that you can't really explain it accurately enough if you just emphasize the not having sex part. It's not even just about solidarity with the rest of the alphabet. It's just within asexuality itself. That would be an oversimplification.
I guess to add here from me, I guess there's a question I have in my head is, what does an asexuality movement look like? And it could look like lots of different things. And somebody earlier mentioned about doing, I don't want to minimize it, but what can look like the smaller things. So I think, just to kind of have an example, the fact there is a Filipino ACES Discord server, the fact there's a place for people to come to that exists where people can be anonymous. And so there's at least a little bit of safety from there. So I don't think, in terms of kind of where different countries can be, movements can look different. That's just the thought I was having.
Right. I was thinking since there is hostility, we have to kind of shave ourselves down, to our safer parts. That's what we start with, right? That's the implication, that we have to start off with our not so offensive parts. That in itself is kind of contradictory to our purpose. Like, if we cannot say that we do not have sexual attraction, how are we gonna identify as, you know, asexuals, that we just do not have it? If we just focus on, oh, I don't like him or I don't like her, we are not focusing on the real fact. So even though it might be hard, there should be a how do I say, there should be a constant process where we're trying to still give the message that it is about sexual attraction, it is about that fact. Otherwise, if we always try to be soft, you know, sometimes it doesn't serve the purpose, I think. So yeah,
Start slow.
I want, right?
Start slow.
Yeah, so start slow. I want to give a heads up, guys. We have 3 more topics, so we are trying to keep this a bit, you know, within the time. So yeah, okay. Many Asian millennials grew up hearing they're from a third world nation in the media. Does the label third world nation create an image of inferiority? If folks from the so-called third world nations try to work alongside folks from first world nations, will they be viewed as equals? Will the economic, political, and cultural disparity create challenges in being viewed as equal? I know it's a big question, so I'm gonna put it there. Please see it for yourself.
I think that's why in other countries, I think when I went to school, I think we were taught to speak of what we might at some point have called third world nations. So I think the polite term these days is developing countries, but yeah, where I'm not sure how people who actually live in those countries feel about that either. But I think the issue is that in an international context, that no matter how you want to word it, it doesn't change the fact that the situation in those countries are the way they are, be it on the economic level or in terms of social development, I suppose. But yeah, in an international context, I think there will be people who want to work with these people, but maybe not so much others. But I think the problem is more that people coming from other more privileged backgrounds, they probably don't know what the exact context is like in other countries, and sometimes you don't know what you don't know, and people can accidentally make things less accessible without meaning to. So yeah.
Excuse me. I just want to say I have to go. Thank you for having me. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Sophia. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. It was nice to meet everyone and to hear from all of you. I hope this discussion has served well for everyone.
Yeah.
Bye.
Just thinking about this question.
Yeah.
It's really interesting to kind of think about this because of how I was brought up and how I would view the Philippines and how it was described as a third world country, a developing country. And there was this kind of even described to be by family members who are Filipino as well, not just, and in addition to that, the way we might have had talked about third world countries and using that phrasing when I was at school as well. So it's the fact that I've had this kind of built into my head kind of since I was young from different people as well. What was I going to say? But I think that the problem with using terms like third world country and developing country is it takes out of context of like, well, why are we seeing this? It's a fact that you have roots in colonialism to that as well. And it's this kind of this, when you use the phrasing, it's kind of like, oh, you're in that position, you know, that's your kind of fault without recognizing the history. Yeah, that's just kind of some of my thoughts when I was just thinking about this question. And I guess to add to that, it's just also in terms of LGBTQ plus rights, it's seen as, oh, these are backward countries.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, but also the state of LGBTQ plus rights is also rooted in colonialist ideas as well.
True. Thank you, Sarah. I think we can move on to our next topic. In the global South, much of our laws and opinions around sexuality have been shaped by colonization. Today, there is a movement to decolonize these laws. How much of the current mindsets around asexuality have been shaped by colonization, and how do we let go of this legacy? Just what Sarah was talking about.
If I may intervene in that, I think I've worked a lot on anti-sodomy laws actually in Mauritius, which were actually the product of colonization, and not just in Mauritius. I think it's the case in Bangladesh and India, which has recently decriminalized, but in many other countries around the world where we have had these laws which have been imposed through colonization. And unfortunately, colonization has not just impacted our laws, but also the way we think about sexuality in our country. And I think there's this really good book by, I think it was Robert Aldrich, on homosexuality and colonialism, where he said that when the colonizers came to this country, they imposed their ways of thinking about intimacy, about sexuality, and tried to interpret the way the people there were behaving through the lens of their ideas. For example, in some countries where they, for example, it was normal for men to have a sort of camaraderie and to, it was normal to hold hands. But when they went to these countries and they saw men holding hands, they interpreted it through the lens of their Victorian values, and they saw that as meaning that the men in these countries were effeminate. And I think that this has led also to the sexualization of Black and brown bodies. That is, in many countries, for example, in Mauritius recently, I was studying the archives around the adoption of the anti-sodomy law. And there was this widespread idea that people of African origin, of Indian origin, they were promiscuous in nature, and that the laws were being imposed on them so that they could curb this promiscuity. And I think that this idea that Black people, brown people are sexual in nature, I think somehow this impedes the understanding we have of asexuality.
Yes. Wow, that, wow. Actually, that's so true. Yes, actually, I guess those ethnicity or even the skin tone has been isolated, or, you know, how do I say, they've been somehow seen as the criminals of the sexual feelings and everything. Yes, thank you so much. Actually, it's like an unknown thought, right? I've always thought about it, but I've never known it. Thank you for that perspective. Does anybody else want to share anything?
I think I have. Sorry. You should go first.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to say, just to add to Anjali's point about Black and brown bodies being sexualized, we also have this problem in a Western context as well. And this is what I mean by intersectionality being really important, because Asian women, for example, get fetishized. Black women can also be sexualized as well. And I know this is something that's been talked about by Yasmin Benoit, for example, who's an asexuality activist in the UK, who's a Black woman. That's what I want to say. Please carry on.
Okay.
On sexualization, can I just add that in the context of Hong Kong, like on one hand, this kind of the media definitely has a strong colonial influence, and this kind of sexualization of people in media in general, that's very much a thing that I think is it's more explicit than it is in like mainland China. But on the other hand, I think because of Hong Kong's colonial history, where I think some aspects of LGBT rights are actually more advanced than it is in mainland China, as far as I understand. So there's this kind of irony where as much as it is actually a legacy of colonialism, it's actually worked out in some people's favor, if you will, where so yeah, for it ended up being like a better outcome for the wrong reason, if you will.
Right.
As for Indonesia, laws and opinions are not only from Western colonizers, but also from groups of conservative people from several different religions, because religion is such a big part of our laws and our government and our basically our daily lives. And as for the effects of colonization, like I said before, there are a few regions in Indonesia where they recognize more than 2 genders. They recognize 5. They recognize like different sexualities people have that are pushed to the back because of the colonizers. And also toxic masculinity is such a big problem here. Like men who are softer, and like even those who kind of like socialize more with women than other men, they are kind of like look strange in Indonesia. Like people will talk about men who socialize with women more, men like who wear makeup, even men who care about their looks or sometimes talk about.
Yeah, that's the same here in Bangladesh. The term is simping. So if you care about the woman, even the woman you love or your partner with, it's seen as a feminine trait. So yeah, I understand that. I think that brings us to the end of it. That's all the topics we had today. I would like to ask Michael, would you please share your thoughts on today's discussion we had?
Well, I mean, yeah, I've really enjoyed being here. Mostly learned a lot from everybody else, and this is definitely I've definitely taken away a lot, which will inform the way that I conduct activism in future. And yeah, it will take me a long time to process everything that's being said here, but I really like some of the suggestions, and in particular, I like the point about creating resources for translators. It's not necessarily just enough to get people to translate. You also need to really give some help, preferably from ACEs who are local to the language, to help with like how to do it. And I also like the point that it's not just about translation, it's also about really empowering local voices to really to really spread ACE awareness.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, everybody, for your time. I think we took a bit more than we promised, but thank you so much for sticking with us. And thank you so much for sharing your input. I wanted to announce the whole recording thing, that this video will be posted in Epiphania Visuals social media during ACE Week. Anwaka will also be sharing asynchronous presentations on the following: asexuality in our native countries, Bangladesh, Nepal, Indonesia, Philippines, Vietnam. Some countries are still making presentations. Asexuality and religion. So far, only received presentations on Islam. Please share this upcoming content and publicize on your social media to the extent that it is safe. I would type it out here so that everybody understands it. It's about all the research contents we have received thus far. And I wanted to also announce that on December 10th, we are going to have another symposium. The topic and the questions and the panelist list will be shared on our messenger group or on our Discord group. Please keep contact with us there. I think I shared with you guys. You can read it in the chat box. Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Michael, and thank you, AVEN, for being with us today. We are so honored to have you here and your valuable input. I would love to thank everybody once again for taking the time to support us and to always support us. I would also like to Thank you. I'd also like to share that Anwaka is still a very small organization. We're still in our infancy. It has only been 1 year, and this is our second annual symposium. So we apologize if we had any technical glitches or any mistakes on our part. Thank you so much. I would love it if you see that that we are still, trying. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you for organizing and thank you for hosting, Layla.
Yeah,
Done a great
thank
job.
you so much. Thank you. Thank you, Michael. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks a lot, everybody. Thank you. Deepa is saying thank you. Epiphania Visuals Director, thank you. I think we can all leave. We have taken enough time here. Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Anjali. Bye, Sarah. Bye, Dia. Bye, Michael. Bye, Pat.
Bye.